Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan Unshuffled. Today I've got a very special episode for you guys, one I've been really anticipating and excited for a long time. And this is the next episode in my Unshuffled series where I go through a particular artist and rank their albums from my least favorite to favorite. And today I'm covering the band Yes, one of the most influential bands in the whole prog rock genre. They really almost pioneered the genre themselves in a lot of ways, at least certain aspects of it. They're such an important band, and they were instrumental to me becoming a huge progressive rock fan. And I've been a little nervous to get into this one just because I know there's a lot of huge Yes fans within my subscribers, and I want to do this ranking justice. But, you know, this is, at the end of the day, this is only my opinions. This is only how I feel about the albums. I'm sure everyone will have a completely different list, and I'm sure there's going to be little quibbles with how I rank certain things. This album's way too high, this album's way too low. But, you know, it's just a personal thing. It's just how I feel about the albums. I've been listening to Yes albums almost nonstop for the last, 2 months in preparation for this, so I've really been trying to delve deep and really assess how I feel about these personally. And many of them I hadn't really heard very much before, and so it was a little bit new to me. So it was a fun experience. And so part of this show is just to kind of relive that experience of the last couple months and my feelings about all these different Yes albums. And really, in my opinion, there are no bad Yes albums. I really like them all. I know there's, some people kind of don't like certain eras of the band and think that this isn't true Yes, and those types of comments I've heard. But to me, there's always a spark of what's special about them in each of their albums. Your mileage may vary. There's different, albums that don't connect with me quite as much, but I still find something fun and enjoyable. And I think they have a certain quality that they bake into each of their albums. So that's my personal opinion. I know other people have different opinions, especially of some of their latest albums. But I'm really excited to delve into it and to talk about it. A couple caveats, just to kind of set the stage here. As with every catalog, there's always kind of little nuances and things that I have to address. So when deciding to do the rankings, usually I go to the site Prog Archives and kind of base it upon what they list as studio albums. So that's kind of my first inkling of how to determine what's a studio album, what isn't, because that's what I'm doing today. I'm ranking the top 21 studio albums by Yes. And one of the strange things is the Keys to Ascension duo, which are half a studio album, half a live material. So do those count in this ranking? I wasn't going to include it as part of the ranking, but I kind of perused other people's lists and how other people rank these, and they usually include, at the very least, the Key Studio version that kind of combines the studio tracks. So I did decide to include that, but it may reflect in my rankings this idea that is it really a true studio album by Yes in the way that all these others are? I don't know. So, but that'll be included because I think people would probably like me to include it on the list. I'm not including Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford, Howe. That's its own separate thing that wasn't considered Yes, so I'm not going to put that as part of my ranking. And when I talk about Fly From Here, I'm going to talk about the original version. I'm not really as into the Return Trip version, so those are kind of the caveats when talking about this. And of course, I won't be talking about any live albums. I know a lot of people love and really cherish a lot of Yes's live albums. They have many, and they're really all different and great in their own ways. Of course, the classic, I'm just going to kind of hold it up here just as kind of almost an honorable mention. Yes Songs, of course, is their classic early live album that's incredible, but I'm not including live albums, so that's not going to be on the list itself. But anyways, that's probably too long of a preamble. Let's get into the ranking. I'm going to talk about the first half kind of quickly, I'm hoping, because I know I kind of drone on too long sometimes, and these videos end up being over an hour long, and I want to spend more time towards the top 10 or so, because those are the ones that really are close to my heart and my favorites, and really ones that I think I should have a lot of cool things to talk about with them. And so let's start at number 21. Can you believe it? There's 21 albums to go through, so this is going to be quite a journey. So at number 21, I'm picking 2014's Heaven and Earth. So I'm ranking this at the bottom. It's probably not much of a surprise to many people. The album, it was fairly disappointing to me when it came out. I was excited because I'm actually a fan of John Davison, and this is really his kind of premiere with the band. He does a lot of material with Glass Hammer, which is a modern prog band that I love, and I just really appreciate him and his voice and thought it could bring a new freshness to the group. But instead, this album it doesn't really work completely. It's the biggest example of like a pleasant album that has like things that are Yes-like in nature, but don't have that true spirit to me of the band. It's just, I don't know if the production values are a little bit off here. I don't know if it's the songwriting that's just not up to par of some of their other surrounding releases, but it never really grabs me. It's enjoyable. There's nothing like that I absolutely hate from it. It's very pleasant, but it's just nothing super special, kind of a Yes light, if you will. But I do like some of the musicianship. I do like some of the tracks. I think Believe Again is a serviceable opener that has some pleasant stuff in it. I think Subway Walls is one of the more interesting tracks that closes the album. But all in all, it's just not one that really ever captured me and was a slight bit disappointing when it came out and kind of spelled kind of some worry for me for the band and what they'd be doing going forward. So that's at number 21. At number 20, I have Union from 1991. And to me, Union is an interesting idea. It's kind of this idea of bringing together these different factions of Yes that were kind of happening at the time. There was kind of this Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe group that I mentioned that were kind of making their own music. And then there was the traditional Yes band that was popular in the 80s style of the band. And so there was almost two different forms of Yes at this time. And so the idea of the album is to kind of bring these two versions together into kind of this mega album. And I believe they toured with all these musicians around this time as well. You know, it was kind of this big event in a sense. So you'd think on paper that would be actually pretty interesting to see how all these different Yes members, some of them who've never recorded together on an album, I would say, see how they would interact and see how it would come together. But I think it just wasn't pulled off very well. I think as much as it's called Union as an album, I just don't feel like the album is very unified. It seems like some of the tracks were written by a certain kind of group of the band and other tracks were written by the other, and they don't really gel completely together. There's some pleasant, good stuff on here. Maybe it's a bit in a poppier vein, especially at the beginning. I Would Have Waited Forever is kind of a poppier track, of course. But, you know, there's good stuff sprinkled throughout here, but I just don't feel like it really works throughout the whole album. So, nice songs, some great hallmarks of Yes. There's a great Steve Howe acoustic guitar piece in Masquerade. There's some interesting stuff between John Anderson and Trevor Rabin, like Lift Me Up. Silent Talking was a track I kind of enjoyed. But all in all, it just doesn't really grab me in quite the same way. It's a step above Heaven and Earth because there's a bit more energy and excitement that I can sense in here, whereas Heaven and Earth just felt a bit devoid of energy, to say the least. But this one, it doesn't come together in a way that's very satisfying as an album. You could pick out pieces that are interesting, but overall, I'm not a huge fan of the album, really. At number 19, I've got Open Your Eyes from 1997. And Open Your Eyes, I was kind of reading a bit about the history of it, and it's kind of interesting because it seemed to develop based on these tracks that were from Billy Sherwood and Chris Squire that were meant for their own band, Conspiracy, but then those kind of got remorphed into a Yes-type album for Open Your Eyes. And I think you can kind of tell that this wasn't really intended to be a true Yes album. There's some definite great stuff on it, but it's just, it doesn't have quite the spirit of Yes that a lot of their other albums do. it doesn't totally work. I think it's fun. I think I was really enjoying it from the beginning, like the first several tracks, but then it just kind of tapered off a bit, and I kind of lost interest as it moved on. I really like New State of Mind. Usually the Yes album openers are all really, really great and really kind of get you hyped up into the album. Fortune Seller I thought was a really fun track on here, catchy and stuck with me, and was one I kind of listened back to. From the Balcony is a great kind of beautiful track with John Anderson and Steve Howe doing their thing. So there's lots of things to enjoy, some great vocals and different things, but overall it just doesn't have that same progressive rock spirit that I'm looking for in my music. It's a little bit more on the poppier side of the band, and there's little flourishes here and there of their kind of prog influences, but overall it almost doesn't sound like a pure Yes album in spots, so that's why it has to be kind of ranked lower at number 19. So now we move into number 18. This is going to be Talk from 1994. And I had a hard time placing this album. This was a tough one for me because I think there's stuff on it that's really great. I think the opening track, The Calling, once again, like I keep talking about the opening tracks, but I think this is a really strong opener that kind of sounds like the band emerging from this kind of 80s poppier style and trying to experiment back with their 70s prog roots. And I really enjoy that. I think it really, really sounds great here. But then after that, after kind of the first track, maybe the first couple tracks, it kind of becomes stale and it kind of meanders a bit. And it doesn't really break out of that until the finale, till the Endless Dream suite at the end, which is actually pretty interesting and some of the best stuff on the album with some heavier proggy sections. Maybe the middle section even goes on a bit too long for me on this and meanders a bit, but overall it's a pretty cool track from this period of the band. I think it's really fun, but ultimately it's kind of a disjointed group of songs with a good opening, a good closing, but in the middle, just a lot of forgettable things that I didn't really find much to enjoy from. So it's them heading in the right direction, kind of figuring out how to evolve from that 80s period. But I feel like it's disjointed. It doesn't really hold together. And a lot of how I judge albums is how does it work as an entire piece? Does it fit together? Does it make sense as a whole album? Or is it disjointed and hard to reconcile how all these disparate tracks kind of fit together? So that'll kind of influence my rankings here. So this one's a little bit on the messy side. Some great flashes of stuff that I really enjoy, but overall, not really my favorite of their catalog. All right, at number 17, we reach this Keys to Ascension duology. Maybe you could consider it Key Studio. The Keys to Ascension albums were released in 1996 and 1997, respectively, and then they were combined in a compilation in 2001. And so I'm putting it here at 17. Maybe this is a bit low for this, because there is a lot of great stuff on here, I'll admit. And it's kind of the band returning to their roots in an even better way than what they did in Talk. I think there's a lot of great classic Yes material here that really harkens back to their classic style. It's a classic lineup. You've got kind of the classic Anderson, Howe, Wakeman, Squire, White kind of lineup that you really want from Yes. And there's some real highlights here. I think it's brought down a tad just because it's hard for me to reconcile this as a full studio album. So once again, like I talked about with Talk, when you're kind of just putting together these different tracks from different albums and trying to consider it a compiled single album, it doesn't fit for me. It's a bit overlong. I think the Keys to Ascension albums work better separately than kind of mashed up in this Key Studio version. And when they're taken separately, I wouldn't consider them studio albums. I'd consider it kind of a live album with some studio tracks as kind of a bonus. And so that's why I considered leaving this off the list, but I figured people would want to see it here to really make it a genuine list of all their albums. But that's kind of what influenced the placement here. But I love Mind Drive. I think it's one of their best post drama epics, and is really cool and kind of brings back that style of the 70s prog that people were really clamoring for. So I think that's really a success on all fronts. And from there, there's just some pretty good stuff. It's pleasant, it's good, it's enjoyable, great harmonies, great playing. There's nothing to really complain about, but there's nothing beyond Mind Drive that really stands out as like, oh, this is amongst the classic Yes songs. So don't get me wrong, I don't dislike it at all. I'd put it on and really enjoy it and think it's a great listen. But when trying to rank it, it just, nothing really stands out to the point of like, oh, I gotta put this high up there. I gotta, and it's kind of disparate, and the tracks, maybe don't hang together for me totally because they come from these different Keys to Ascension album. Maybe if Keys to Ascension was released as a full studio album back when those albums were released instead of kind of cobbled together, maybe that would have been interesting to me. Maybe this needs to be cut down to this core, like maybe 60 minutes of great stuff. But it's just, as in its current form, it's just not going to rank super highly for me, even though I enjoy a lot of the music on it quite a bit. So that's why I've placed it there. Hopefully that's not too controversial, but I think it's a good spot for it, seeing what's coming up. All right, now we get into number 16, and for 16, I'm going with Big Generator from 1987. And I know a lot of people probably don't like this album very much and would rank it even quite a bit lower than what I have it here. But when I was listening to it, going in with, I don't think I'd really heard the full album. I've heard a couple songs from it, but I hadn't heard the full album because I had heard about its reputation, about like, oh, it's one of the weaker Yes albums, really was them kind of selling out in this pop direction. A lot of people didn't like it, thought it was quite a step down from 90125. But listening to it, I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. I thought there was quite a charm to it, and I thought every track had something interesting in it. So I was actually surprised. I kind of like Trevor Rabin and his influence on the group in this period. Maybe that's a bit controversial, but I think he really brought Yes into a very interesting direction, where a band like Genesis totally morphed into something different in the 80s that almost had no traces of their early 70s material. I feel like Yes, what Trevor Rabin did with Yes was kind of to keep that Yes spirit alive, but to kind of modernize it into kind of this 80s aesthetic, to make it fit better into the modern 80s sound at the time. And I think it worked pretty well. I mean, of course, as a giant prog nerd, I'm of course going to prefer their prog period from the 70s. But to me, this is kind of the best case scenario for them embracing this 80s period and kind of becoming popular with the music of the time, but still not sacrificing who they are as a band. So I just really, really like them and this period of the group, surprisingly, because I expected to come in and not like this album very much. But I think Rhythm of Love is just like a perfect 80s pop song, really an incredible song with great harmonies, and it's really well crafted and just sounds really great. I like the production on these as well. But really, the two tracks that really stand out to me is Shoot High, Aim Low, and I'm Running, which do this perfectly of kind of giving you these progressive influences. These are longer tracks that are close to 8 minutes in length, so they kind of have that progressive style length, and there's different things that are interesting and going on in the music, but it fits in this 80s aesthetic so as not to seem like totally oddball to someone who preferred them in their 80s style. So I think it's a really cool album that's really underappreciated because it just has a lot going on for it and really works well in that period of time for the band. So, and once again, great playing, great singing from John Anderson, just a really great album that shows that progressive flavor, but with an 80s pop sheen over the top of it. And I actually think it works for me. Now we move into number 15, and this is where I'm going to place their latest album, The Quest, from this year, 2021. Now, I know, I feel like this is a bit controversial. I did my big review of The Quest, and I talked very favorably about it. I really enjoyed it. most people in the comments were very nice about it and very cool. And a lot of people shared my thoughts about the album and that it was good. But there's, of course, people who just really don't like it and think it's just almost not even pure Yes. It's like the band should retire at this point. There's a lot of comments like that. I don't come to Yes to hear this kind of tepid, uninspired music. Comments of that nature. And I can see when you put this side by side to something like the classics of the 70s, like Close to the Edge, Fragile, it's easy to see why people might have that opinion and think that this in comparison is not as exciting and as special. But I really like the album. I listened to it again just for the purposes of this ranking. Like, did I assess it too high in my review? Am I being not critical enough of it? But I just think it's a pleasant album that they really worked hard on. This is an interesting configuration of the group, and I think it comes across really great. I think there's several highlights. Really, to me, the highlights of the album are the Ice Bridge, which I think is a fantastic, once again, opener that shows that kind of excitement and style from Yes that I want. I really like Leave Well Alone. I think it's a great piece by Howe with really interesting groove and funk to it, but then kind of a good play out that's similar to like Starship Trooper, and just really does a great job in what it's trying to do. I really love Future Memories. I think it's a great chance for John Davison to shine. And so it's really a pleasant, great album that really works for me. I think every track has something enjoyable in it. I think the band is really in top form. I think they're playing really well. I could tell that they're really excited about this material, and it shows in it. And so I just think it's a very consistent album, and I think it really shows promise for where the band's at now. And sure, it's not like classic Yes. It's not like you can put it next side by side with some of their classics. It's them in a different era doing something different. They're older now. They're doing things in a slightly more laid-back style, I think, which kind of makes sense because of, where they're at in their mindset. And as a band, they're kind of, relaxing a bit more and are more into that style of music, I think, as time moves on, and are kind of moving away from the more experimental, progressive music of the 70s. And I think that's fine. I think I'm cool with hearing that from the band. So I'm good with The Quest. I think it's a good album, and I think it fits right here in this ranking. I think it's a good spot for it. So now is kind of another duo of albums that I had a hard time ranking because I'm not quite totally sure how I feel about these yet. But at number 14, I'm going to pick Yes from 1969, their very first debut album. Why this is hard for me to judge is because I feel like the band is still very unpolished at this stage. And I tend to not be a huge fan of kind of the early period of certain bands, like their debut album where they're still kind of finding their footing and still figuring out who they are, haven't really come into their own quite yet. And so that's kind of why this is placed a bit lower maybe than some would put it, because to me it's a bit, they haven't dialed in yet to what Yes is supposed to be for me. They would do so on the Yes album, which was kind of a reintroduction to the band. But on this album, it's kind of this hybrid of this kind of experimental, psychedelic kind of band, kind of has that late 60s feel to it. They're doing a lot of covers, where I prefer originals. And so there's good stuff here, but to me, I almost view it more as an interesting curiosity of the band. Like, it's interesting to see their roots and where they started and where they went from there. Kind of seeing this early formation and how the band stacked up in these early albums. But there's a lot to enjoy. They do really great in these prog covers. It's cool that they take like these songs from the era and progify them in a way. Like Every Little Thing takes a Beatles song and progifies it. Same with the Byrds cover, I See You, which is great. And these are kind of some of the standouts of the record. I really love Survival, which closes out the record. I think that's like one of the first really great Yes songs in their catalog. But beyond those, like, it's kind of a mixed bag. You know, some songs are pleasant and sweet. Some songs are a little bit messy and a little bit all over the place. Maybe it's a bit too much in that psychedelic, spacey vibe for me. But I appreciate it. I think it's a great start for the group. It shows a lot of promise. And John Anderson is already kind of on point from the beginning. You know, he has a great sound even in these early stages of the group. So really respect it and appreciate it. But it ranks here at 14 because it's not them in their prime yet. You know, it's them finding that footing and kind of figuring themselves out. And similarly, we move on to 13, which is the next album, Time in a Word from 1970. So once again, I think it's a bit of a leap forward for the band. I think they're kind of progressing in an interesting way at this point. I like that there's a lot of orchestral elements to this. You know, the band really decided to take on this orchestral sound, and it enhances things a bit for me. I think it's really interesting. I love a lot of tracks. I love Then. I love The Prophet is a very interesting, cool song. Time in a Word, the title track, is a classic. And once again, it's just them continually finding their footing as a band. It's them trying to figure themselves out. And I think they are moving in the right direction. I think they're really figuring out who they are as they continue forward. And so it's a bit of a step up from Yes, but only slightly so. But they're about to take a huge leap as they move forward from here. But that's why these two albums are paired to me. I kind of had to put them next to each other side by side because, you know, I feel similarly about them. That they're a band trying to find themselves. Not quite there yet, but getting close. And really impressive for a band that's so fresh and young to already have such complex, cool material like this is really a feat to behold. And it really blows my mind that they not only are complex and creative here, but they figure out a way to evolve that as they move forward, which is really awesome. And so I'm really a big fan of that. When I was younger and my dad was first getting me into the band, this is the album I had, Yesterdays, which features kind of tracks from both of these first two albums. So this to me is all I need from those first two albums. You know, this is to me the highlights of it and the tracks that I really loved and fell in love with. So I'm probably biased on that because this is the one I heard when I was younger and really appreciated. I didn't hear these albums in full till this kind of recent re-listen. So I really love Yesterdays, and I think it's a great summary of the band and this period and what they did. And so that's the one I'd recommend for a first-time listener to these early period. All right, so now we move to number 12. And this is going to be Fly From Here from 2011. Fly From Here is a really interesting record. I really enjoyed it when it came out, and I think it's really great. It takes material that Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes wrote kind of in the drama era of Yes back in the early 80s, and kind of reworks it in a modern Yes setting. And I think that's really interesting. I think the Fly From Here epic that starts the album is really great, and it harkens back to that style of the band from that drama era, which I really like. And so I really felt good about this album. And I think from there, all the tracks and kind of following the epic are really pleasant as well. They're really great, and they sound great here. I really love Into the Storm. The closing track on the album has always been one of my favorite modern Yes songs, kind of a bouncy, fun track that kind of harkens back once again to that kind of drama era of the group where they had a lot of prog influences, but some poppiness in the mix too. So it's a successful album to me. I think it's really good. It's not super progressive, I'd say. It's more kind of in their pop vein, more, you know, even though Fly From Here is kind of a long epic, I feel like each piece of it is pretty much kind of a poppier version of Yes with a little bit of that proggy influence. So, but I think it's a good fit for the band in this later stage of their career. And I really love Benoit David, and I think he really brings a great aspect to the group in his sound, because I feel like his voice is unique enough where it doesn't feel like a John Anderson clone, like maybe some other singers might sound like. I feel like he's doing enough of his own thing but it's in that range and in that style, and so it doesn't feel like wildly different than other Yes albums, you know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'm at with it. Was kind of disappointed. I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but when they came out with the Return Trip version, which kind of brings back Trevor Horn on vocals, I was kind of disappointed because I really like Benoit David and his voice, and I would imagine it would be disappointing to like have your dream come true and sing on a Yes album, and then they kind of wipe it out of existence with a new version of it and do this kind of redone version with a different singer. I don't know. It kind of rubbed me wrong at the time. I kind of get what they were going for because, you know, Trevor Horn was so involved in the creating of this music back in the time it was written. But I always thought that was kind of a weird thing that they did, that they re-recorded an album with a slightly different personnel list. It was just kind of an oddball thing. So I've always stuck with this original version and not really delved into the Return Trip, but that's just kind of my preference. Moving on from there, at number 11, we're moving into getting close to the top 10, just missing out on the top 10. At number 11, I'm picking The Ladder from 1999.
Nothing can take us far enough emotion, far enough to...
Now, this was just a joy to listen to. As soon as I put it on, I just had a huge smile on my face. I think it's the best thing they did in the 90s. It's full of positivity, has a very strong John Anderson influence, I'd say, in the lyrics and in the sound of it. I think he had a lot to say in here. Really great playing by Steve Howe, reminiscent of how he sounded back in the 70s. One of the greatest instances of them kind of blending their newfound style of catchy pop hooks that they did throughout the 80s and early 90s, but then bringing back their 70s progressive rock roots. I really love the opening track. I think it's a total classic, Homeworld. I love It Will Be a Good Day. It's just pleasant and fun and positive. I love The Messenger. It has a great positive, good vibe. The New Language is a great longer track. Nine Voices was just really beautiful and almost kind of calls back I've Seen All Good People from the Yes album, so it's kind of a throwback in a sense. So it's them kind of honoring their history, but bringing it into a new modern era. And I think it was successful. I think it was done better than a lot of those albums like Talk and even Keys to Ascension. I think it was done really expertly here, and it's just a joy to listen to. And maybe I'm a bit biased on it because I'm pretty sure this was kind of right at that time where I was still discovering music as a teenager that this came out, and my parents, I think, picked this up and listened to a lot in the car. I think it's an album my mom really enjoyed a lot and listened to over and over, so it brings kind of feelings of nostalgia from then. And I really love John Anderson, and I feel like this is a great showcase for him. So that's kind of why it ranks so highly in my estimation. I think it's just really a fun album, just brings a smile to my face. I'm always looking for positive music that really brings me up and lifts me up. And that's one of the main reasons why I like Yes in general, is their music just really lifts me up and brings happiness and joy to me. And this album does that in a really big, great way. And so I have to rank it highly at number 11. All right. And so next I'm going to get into the top 10. This is exciting. I'm finally, this is probably getting really long, but I'm going to soldier on ahead with my top 10 Yes albums. Number 10, 90125 from 1983. Now, maybe this is a bit high for some of you that maybe don't prefer the 80s Yes, and that's fine. You could probably place it a few spots lower, but I placed it this high because I just feel like it's what they were going for really succeeded in this case. So I kind of have to give them props for doing what seems to be an impossible task, which is kind of bringing Yes, which is so rooted in this 70s aesthetic and in this prog rock style, and figuring out a way to not lose the spirit of that, but to bring it into an 80s pop sort of vibe. And I think it's done really well here. I think Trevor Rabin can kind of be really applauded for his efforts in bringing Yes into a more modern direction. And so I really think it's really cool. a really cool album that has an interesting history. It was kind of a reinvigoration for the band after they were all but dismissed. So it's really exciting to me that they were able to have such a successful, great album at this time in their career. And really, I think it's the reason why we continue to have Yes now. And they didn't just quit at the end of the 70s and just call it a day, and then you have this great set of records, but then you don't get to continue on the legacy. And I think that's an important piece of the Yes story, is that they continue onwards and they continue to develop and continue to change their lineups and change their sounds, but still have that core base of who they are and their spirit. To me, that's what's special about Yes. And so this is an important step in that journey. And so it's just really a good, solid album. And maybe it doesn't have so much of the progressiveness that I really prefer from the band, but I can't deny just the great compositions here. Owner of a Lonely Heart is just such a great 80s pop song. I really love Leave It. I think it's just the vocals that they do with kind of this, different harmonies and different vocal stylings. It's just really successful. I think it comes across really well. I love Changes. I think it's just a killer song. Just a bit of that progressive spirit, but a super catchy chorus, and just really bringing these two worlds into a very cohesive whole. I just really appreciate that. Cinema, you get a kind of a little bit of that instrumental 70s style, prog flavor in there. So you get a little bit of a piece of that. But around it is a lot of these just great, well-crafted pop prog songs, And I really like Hearts that closes the album. I think it really brings it to a great close. I think it's a really successful album. Just every song is really great. And it hits that perfect sweet spot for me of like really good, catchy pop, but with a bit of that progressive spirit. And so that's why I place it highly at number 10, 90125. Now we move to number 9. This is Magnification from 2001. And this is another album that's really near and dear to my heart because, once again, it was kind of the newest Yes album when I was really heavily involved in progressive rock. This was kind of right in that era where my dad was showing me all of these great progressive rock albums, and we kind of got the new Yes album at the same time, so I kind of equate that with a lot of the 70s Yes sound. And I think it's a perfect example of what makes Yes so special, and I think they really knocked it out of the park with their inclusion of an orchestra on here. I think it was really successful, and it really marries together with that prog rock sound of Yes really well. And so I think it's just really successful. I think they do a great job of it. And I would think going into it, there's no real keyboards on this. It's just John Anderson, Steve Howe, Chris Squire, Alan White, and the orchestration is kind of in place of the keyboards. And at first glance, I would think, I'm sure I'm going to miss the keyboards and stuff. But I think for this album in particular, it works really well. The orchestrations really bring out that element that the keyboards usually would, but I think it brings it up in a grand, majestic fashion that really raises the level of these pieces. And I'm in love with this album. It's one that I think of in the same vein as the classic period of the band, because it just has that feel to it. It has a bit of that progressive nature, and it just has that grand, majestic feel that some of the best Yes music has. And I think the orchestra really helps to bring that along. I think John Anderson is doing a great job on vocals. I love the title track, Magnification. I love Give Love Each Day is such a highlight and one of my favorite Yes tracks. I love In the Presence Of that is towards the end of the album. Just a great little mini epic that has such a great vibe to it and is just so well written and so beautiful. I'm really in love with this. I think it's a more successful version of what they tried to do way back when with Time and a Word. I think the orchestra works a lot better here, and it's just really beautiful. It really works, and it really gives me all that I want from Yes. Maybe it doesn't have the same originality or excitement or, experimental nature of the 70s, but it really does sit right in the right pocket for me of Yes and what makes them so special. And I think it really succeeds at what it's going for. And so it's kind of a good send-off, because I believe this is the last studio album that features John Anderson, and I think it's an excellent finale for him that really showcases him in the greatest possible light. So for that respect, it's really a great album that brings pleasant memories to me of just listening to this when I was first getting into Yes and really appreciating their music. All right, finally we're here at number 8. We're finally entering kind of into the more classic period of the band, the era that I know and love the best. And so that's where we're going to kind of head out this show with from 8 on upwards. So at number 8, I'm picking Tormato from 1978. There's a lot of mixed feelings about this album, I would say, and a lot of people might think this is ranked a bit high, perhaps. I know there's a lot of thoughts out there about this album and that it's just doesn't measure up to some of their other 70s material. It's them kind of losing the plot a little bit of what made them so special. It doesn't really have the great standout tracks of some of their earlier stuff. And granted, I understand that, but it's still classic 70s Yes for me, so I still have to put it in its place here up towards the top just because of that. And because, once again, it's an album that my parents actually really love. You know, I didn't know that was the perception of Tormato. When I was just listening to the albums with my dad and he was introducing me to the band, I just figured this was a cherished, loved Yes album from that period because my parents love it. It was only later when I started to really dive into progressive rock on my own and I'd read more people's opinions and how they ranked albums and things like that I started to discover that this album really wasn't ranked very highly, and a lot of people view it as kind of a misstep during this period of the band, which was kind of surprising to me because I really appreciate it in a big way. I think it has some great stuff on it, and to me it almost feels like a great pair with Going for the One. I feel like they kind of have a similar style and sound to them, Going for the One and this one. You know, there's a certain feeling of Yes in this period where they're moving a bit away from their like big grandiose progressive rock from before, kind of becoming a bit more accessible, but still having flavors of that progressive spirit. Definitely, these are progressive rock records. I wouldn't say they aren't, but I think they're trying to streamline their sound a bit more into this more accessible lane with stronger melodies and kind of dialing back the excess of, you know, the grand progressive epics that some people probably felt they were maybe going a bit over the top with. So this was them kind of reining it back in, I suppose. So I view this as kind of a pair with Going for the One, but not, obviously Going for the One's ranked higher because I haven't gotten to it yet. But so obviously I prefer that record over this one, but it's not too far removed from it for me. I really love Future Times / Rejoice, really great opener that has that really majestic Yes sound that I look for. I think Don't Kill the Whale is a fun kind of bouncy poppier song. Madrigal is a pretty John Anderson piece. Release is a great rocker. And towards the end of the record, I think Onward is such a beautiful song. It's a song that's really special to my parents, so I'm always kind of partial to it. And On the Silent Wings of Freedom is a great kind of closing mini longer track. I think it's a really cool track that brings that spirit of the band. I think in the middle you have a couple things like Arriving UFO and Circus of Heaven that are a bit twee and a bit like not really what I'm coming to Yes for. They're probably some of the weaker songs of this period of the band. But everything around it is just really, really great and really well done and still captures that spirit of 70s Yes that I totally adore. So all in all, I just really love the record, and I think it's just a fantastic piece of work by the band that gets often overlooked, and it's kind of gotten this perception over time that it's just not as strong as other stuff, and I understand that people are entitled to those opinions and so forth. But I think it deserves kind of a relook and kind of a reassessment sometimes because there's actually a lot to really love in this record. And maybe there's a few pieces that don't quite measure up to the rest, but what is there that's really strong is really great. So I really love it as a whole. So definitely deserving to be up in this spot at number 8 on my list. All right, so now we get to number 7. And number 7 is Drama from 1980. And this is a fantastic album. This is one, my dad's kind of pilgrimage through Yes that he shared with me kind of ended with Tormato. That's really the period he loves, is from like the Yes album to Tormato is like his bread and butter. And beyond that, it's very spotty of what kind of Yes music that he knows. So Drama is one I came onto later, and I kind of figured before I heard it, I'm like, okay, Drama's going to be their like ascent into 80s style. It's going to be their poppy attempt, kind of like some of the 80s Genesis stuff that I was aware of. But I was so pleasantly surprised that this is not that at all. It has some of the most progressive stuff from the band. Machine Messiah is just this really fantastic progressive rock piece. It's 10 minutes long. It's kind of heavier than a lot of other Yes stuff. It's almost like veering into this like proto-metal territory almost. Not quite maybe, but it's really an interesting longer epic with a darker feel than some of their other stuff in certain sections. You know, of course, there's the lighthearted sections as well that are more kind of bouncy and fun, but there's that kind of heavy riffage that kind of starts it and kind of brings you to a new mindset. Like, okay, this is a new version of Yes. This is really interesting. But every track is really cool. Tempest Fugit is just like one of my favorite Yes songs of all time. I think it's just a total classic. So just really great. I love Into the Lens as well. It's really, there's no bad tracks. It just moves along great. I think Chris Squire kind of takes a leading role in a lot of the playing, you know, his voice, you kind of, because I think the big thing about this album is that it doesn't feature, it's the first to not have John Anderson. And John Anderson was such a critical member of the group. I think a lot of people dismiss it because, oh, no John Anderson, oh, it's not real Yes, because John Anderson has to be there to consider it to be Yes. But I think they proved that they can still be Yes even without John Anderson, as controversial as that may seem. And I think Chris Squire has a lot to do with that, because his bass sound is so critical for the band and their sound, and his backing vocals are just such an important part of the group as well. And so I think once you have those elements, then it starts to sound a lot like Yes. And so to me, this totally fits in their catalog and sounds like classic Yes to me. And I think it may be the best prog album of the 80s, if you could consider it an 80s album, since it just gets released right at the beginning of the 80s. But if you were to look at all of the different progressive albums from the 80s, this would stand head and shoulders above most of it, because it still retains that progressive rock. Maybe there's little flourishes of like their development into a more poppier sound, but overall it really captures that classic progressive rock spirit in a really great way, and it sounds fantastic. And it's a shorter album, but it packs a punch, and every minute of it is utilized very well. It's just a really great album that I think needs to be reevaluated, and I think people need to hear it because it's really great. I need to introduce my dad to it a bit more. I don't know if he's even really given it that much of a dedicated listen, because he's kind of that camp of like how important John Anderson is to the band. So anyways, just as an aside for people who like my dad's thoughts on this kind of stuff. All right, now we move into the top 6, and to me this is where we get into like the premier Yes music. This is like all 5-star albums. This is my favored period of the band. So to rank these 6 is really difficult because they all are so close, and really it's hard to kind of put this in front of the other because of how great they all are. But so keep that in mind. If you quibble a bit with how these are placed, they're all really close in my eyes. They're all 5-star albums. You know, if I could have a 6-way tie for number 1, maybe that's where I'd go with it. But because my job here is to actually do a ranking, I'm going to rank them. So here we go. Number 6 is Going for the One from 1977. I really love Going for the One. It's a perfect album. Just every track hits hard and is great. And what's really cool about it to me is that each track is pretty different from one to the next. They really kind of came in with these tracks that each have their own personality. Going for the One is almost a more country-ish Western vibe to it in some ways. I think because of Howe's playing on it. He has that kind of electric pedal steel guitar sound going on, so it has a really interesting sound to it. Turn of the Century is just this gorgeous ballad that's like this beautiful love song. Parallels is like this harder rocker. Wondrous Stories is just a kind of a poppier song that could fit in the maybe more radio play version of the band. And then Awaken is just the grand, majestic epic to close things out. So it's a really interesting album with every track is its own unique thing that I think works really well. I feel like my dad's opinion of this album was always a bit lower than what mine was, because I think he never really cared for the title track very much. I think it's a bit too in that kind of country-ish style that he doesn't like too much, but I think it's really cool. But he does love Turn of the Century. I know that for sure. That's one of his favorites. So he doesn't totally dislike this album, but it's one I rediscovered and learned how great it was kind of after the fact. Maybe that's why it's placed a bit lower than some of the ones upcoming that have a bit more of that nostalgia for me. But it's great. And listening to Awaken on this re-listen, it's so beautiful. It's one of their top works for sure. It's everything you'd want in a Yes song. It's kind of this grand not reintroduction, but it's Rick Wakeman kind of really showcasing everything he's about. He was absent on the previous record to this one on Relayer, so it's kind of his return to the group, and I think Awaken is his statement of just beauty and so much going on with the organ and how it's played in here. There's so many goosebump moments for me. John Anderson's vocals are just heavenly. He does an incredible work here. It's really a beautiful track that I think really stands up as one of the best moments in the Yes catalog. It's wonderful. I can't wait to shuffle into it with Jana. It'll be a really good one, I think, because I think she can appreciate a lot of that as well. So really love it. I think it's a great, consistent album and kind of a return, like I was saying with Tormato, a return to a bit more accessible version of Yes after these big, sprawling progressive rock masterworks. This was a bit more streamlined. Besides Awaken, the tracks were a bit shorter and more digestible, I would say, than these big, long, epic pieces that really permeated their last few records. So I think they succeeded in that attempt, and it's a really beautiful album that really deserves a high placement on any Yes listing here. All right, so at number 5, I've got the Yes album from 1971. The Yes album, of course, is a total classic. To me, it's when the band really came into their own and figured out who they were. After, like I talked about, Yes and A Time and a Word, those were a bit like the band trying to find their footing and trying to figure out who they were. And I feel like this is them arriving on the scene. Okay, this is who we are. We're embracing this progressive rock style. It's just such a leap upward in the band's sound to me. It's just like night and day listening to those first 2 records and then moving to this one. And wow, they really progressed in a huge way on this record. I think Steve Howe's introduction really has a lot to do with it. I think he brought the band to another level because of his influences and his style. I think that really kind of solidified what Yes were all about in a big way. But just every track is just super cool and really a classic. Yours Is No Disgrace is the opener, and it's just perfect opening track. It's a rocker, but it really has a lot of those great harmonies and just really moves along at a great pace. Clap is this introduction once again to Steve Howe and his acoustic guitar playing. It's kind of a little bit maybe out of place because it's this little live track amidst all these other pieces, but I think it works because it works as kind of an introduction to who Steve Howe is and his playing style, and of course his performance is excellent on it. Starship Trooper is a total classic, one of my favorites by the group. Just moves along in such a pleasant way in so many different ways. It's like there's 3 different sections and they're all equally great. It really moves along and has a great classic progressive rock play out at the end in Worm that's just so iconic for the group. I've seen All Good People is Yes at their best in their poppier side. They're very catchy, great harmonies and vocals, and then it kind of has that Your Move section to start and then moves into All Good People, which is really that great sing-along kind of bouncy fun track. Adventure, I think, is a little bit underrated. I think it's a really great shorter track by the group that has a great sound to it, kind of a bouncier kind of song. And then Perpetual Change kind of brings it to an epic conclusion, really showcases their progressive rock spirit. There's a section in Perpetual Change that always grabbed me of where there's like one thing going in one speaker, there's one kind of sound going here, and then it introduces it in a different speaker, a whole different piece of the song almost. And it's like these two melodies, which you wouldn't think would fit together very well because they're just two different melodies, really kind of blend together in an interesting way. It's very progressive. It's very experimental. And it was one of the first things I heard that really made me realize how much of a prog fan I was, how I liked experimentation and doing different things and not just having your conventional song structure that other bands do. So just a really cool aspect of it that I really loved. And so this definitely deserves a high ranking. It's a wonderful album and is one of the high points of progressive rock when it really was getting its footing, and it was really exciting. So, and that moves to number 4, where we get to Fragile from the same year, 1971. What an incredible year for Yes, that they released 2 iconic albums in the same year. And Fragile is, what can be said? It's a classic of the genre. It's beautiful. Every track, at least the band tracks, are just also iconic and great. Roundabout is just the perfect opener and really the greatest statement for who the band is to kind of a wider audience. It was a track that was very popular at the time, and it really is a great marriage of kind of that classic rock style that was really popular and catchy and good, but also the proggy influences, great bass playing, of course, and it was really a great track that I think is one of their biggest songs even to this day. South Side of the Sky is a bit of an underrated classic, some great piano. Of course, this album is the introduction of Rick Wakeman, and I think this has a great piano to it, great harmony vocals, gives a bit of a darker edge than some of their Yes album tracks. Long Distance Runaround is a shorter track, but fun and bouncy and catchy. Complex in ways, but also fun and catchy. I think Yes kind of does that line really well, where they have really complex, interesting music, but it's catchy and can be accessible to a lot of people. And then Heart of the Sunrise is one of their best tracks. It just closes the album in such epic fashion. It builds and builds, has so much frenetic energy to it, but then some beautiful sections where John Anderson is just singing so beautifully. It has it all. It soars, it rocks, it's majestic, it's epic. It's just everything about the band in one great piece of music. What probably makes this a little bit lower than some of the albums to come is the idea that they had to insert these little solo tracks throughout. They have these band tracks, and then they have each band member has kind of a solo track that they insert into the music, these kind of shorter, almost interlude type things. And those are a bit of a mixed bag for me. I kind of appreciate the concept. I think it's kind of cool, the idea that you're kind of being introduced to the band and the different members, and you kind of get a solo spot from each of them. It's kind of an interesting idea, but at some points it kind of breaks the flow a little bit in some ways. And some of these tracks are more successful than others, like I said. Cans and Brahms is fine, but it's never been my favorite. It kind of, I think Rick Wakeman does a lot better things in other ways, so I'm not sure this is his best showcase. We Have Heaven is fine, is kind of John Anderson, very John Anderson, and so I think it fits as his solo. It kind of makes me feel like something that could have been on Elias of Sunhillow or something, something from one of his solo records. 5% for Nothing is just kind of too short to really grab me. It's kind of interesting, it's Bill Bruford's kind of showcase, but just not enough there to really make me feel a certain way about. And The Fish is probably one of my favorites of the solo pieces. This is Chris Squire, and almost feels like an additional instrumental piece to Long Distance Runaround, because it kind of comes right after Long Distance Runaround. And so I really appreciate Chris Squire's playing in that one, and I think that one is a great one. And Mood for a Day is a classic as well. Steve Howe does a great guitar piece, kind of a classical style. So those are really good. So all in all, these are very minor quibbles. Like I said, it's still a perfect album, and I really respect and appreciate what they were going for. I think it's an interesting concept, and something that they would kind of explore later, where they took a break from their studio albums and all did different solo albums for a period of in their history. So it's obviously something that they like to do. So I think it works really well here, and the band tracks are just so excellent and such perfect Yes music that you can kind of excuse these little kind of solo spots. They don't really take away too much from the grandiose epics that permeate the rest of the disc. All right, and number 3, we've got Tales from Topographic Oceans from 1973. And this is my dad's favorite Yes album, so that's partly why I placed it so highly. It has such nostalgia for me just because of that reason. I know my dad just really gushed about it when he shared it with me. It was kind of an important moment for us, and so I'll always remember it fondly for that reason. So I love this album. The top 3, if you've kind of done the math by now, are probably their 3 biggest, most progressive albums, because that's what I like. The more grandiose, the more proggy, the more complex, the more, diverse and crazy it is, the more I'm going to enjoy it. So that's kind of what flavors my perception of these final few albums. That's where I think Yes is at their best and most creative, is when they really expand in these huge pieces of music that just go in so many different directions and do so much. And it brings kind of the perfect marriage of these complex instrumentals, but then these kind of softer sections where John Anderson is able to really bring the emotion and just that feeling of majesty and epicness. It's a beautiful combination that I think is done expertly on these records specifically. For this album, it's a double disc. Each side of the album is its own epic piece, and I think they all work really well. I think it's a really interesting experiment, and I think of this album more as a journey. I think of it as kind of a musical experience versus like just a collection of songs. It's a different kind of format, and at least I think that was the vision that John Anderson had as he was kind of coming up with the concept of this. It sounds like him and he was kind of the main one who came up with the idea of this concept. But I think it comes across really well. It's just such a beautiful album with so many different pieces to it. The only thing that maybe makes it a little bit lower is The Ancient, which I feel like has a bit too much of that frenetic craziness at the beginning that's hard for me to grasp hold of. I love when it kind of lands in the more acoustic moment towards the end. It has some beauty to it with like that Steve Howe, John Anderson feel towards the end. But before that, it's just strange rhythms and chaotic music, kind of like that beginning to Close to the Edge a bit, but done over a really extended period of time. And sometimes that gets a little bit overwhelming and a bit too much for me. But the other tracks, the other 3 are just all pure gems to me. Just all the music is beautiful. There's rocking sections. There's beautiful slower section. There's a folky vibe. There's just, it's a really cool constructed album. Each piece kind of has its own place and kind of has a different feel and vibe to it. I love Revealing Science of God. I think it's just one of their best epics. I think it really goes through so many different things, some majestic heights, some heavier rocking sections, but keeps this kind of overwhelming positive vibe and spirit. The Remembering is a little bit of a forgotten gem, I think. I think it's better than people give it credit for. It's really beautifully crafted. It has a lot of acoustic moments, feels a bit folky in moments, and kind of has this feeling of fluidity, like you're in water, and I kind of like that one. And Wakeman does some great playing as well throughout it, and Ritual just kind of brings it all home. It's a standout that brings back sections from Revealing Science of God and has its own vibe to it. It's really epic and really a great closer. Just a diverse, beautiful album. And I think for lovers like me of progressive rock who like the adventurousness of it, that's kind of why I came aboard progressive rock, is because I like the adventure. I like that there's no boundaries, that pop music sometimes feels like so static because you have to live within this like 3-minute song range, has to have verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. It has this very standard structure. They only usually deal with certain chords and certain styles. It feels very limiting. But what I love about progressive rock is that it takes away those limits and says, why don't we just like explore? Why don't we do these different soundscapes and see where it goes? Let's jam and see like where it takes us. Let's take a journey with music and make it an experience. And to me, that's so much better and so much more special. And I totally adore that about progressive rock. And I think this album, almost more than any other, embodies that spirit. And maybe some people probably felt like Yes took it a little too far. They went a little kind of off the rails a bit and lost kind of the melody a bit here. But I don't feel that way. I am glad they took this risk, and I'm glad that they decided to explore this, because it's a fascinating journey. And what I love about it is that there's always more to uncover. There's depths to it. You know, a lot of standard albums you listen to once and you kind of get the idea. And as much as you have fun re-listening just because it's fun to listen to, you don't really uncover much new to it because you kind of figured it all out at first listen. But what's great about these progressive rock albums, and especially one this dense and this complex, is that there's different layers. You know, you hear something new each time you listen, and it really uncovers something special and makes the album a living organism almost that you can continue to come back to and continue to explore and discover new things. It's not an album that like, okay, I've heard it, I know what this is, and I can shelve it, and I don't need to hear it anymore. I have it in my brain, and that's all there is to it. This is something I can pull out, and like something new kind of sticks out to me this time because there's just so much there, so many layers, so much to uncover. So I think I've talked enough about it, but I just really love this album, and I think it's a little bit underrated by certain people, and it deserves a lot more attention because they really went for it. And I know even certain band members didn't appreciate it. I think Rick Wakeman left the group because he didn't like the direction this went in and felt like it was a bit too meandering and didn't really capture that spirit of what he thought was the best part of Yes. But I disagree. You know, I think it's kind of a natural progression for the group that they would go on and explore this. And I'm glad they went there. So for me, an essential album in my collection. All right, at number 2, we've got Relayer from 1974. Now this was kind of a surprise. This leapfrogged up a few levels than I expected. But as I was listening to it this time, it was the one that surprised me the most with how excellent this album truly is. It really captivated me, and I felt like it deserved a high spot on this list. So it kind of jumped ahead of Tales, even though, as you could tell, I have such strong emotions and feelings about Tales. But Gates of Delirium might be my single favorite song by Yes. It's perfect for me. You know, as the big grandiose prog lover of music, I think it really succeeds at what it's going for. It's experimental, it's adventurous, it really brings a picture to your mind of what's happening story-wise, has some great sections, great playing by everyone. Everyone's like at the top of their game playing-wise. Like it's incredible, next level stuff. And then you've got John Anderson at the heart of it, and ending with Soon, and this just beautiful ballad that closes this piece in perfection and in majesty, and it just gives you that kind of light and positivity at the end of the tunnel. It's just everything I want from Yes. I think it's the perfect track. It kind of signifies this battle throughout, so it's very intense. Patrick Moraz comes on board to replace Rick Wakeman here, and his playing is just off the wall, crazy, but in such a great way. He has kind of this jazzy influence, and I feel like his keyboards are such a showcase in this piece. But there's such great percussion moments, there's such great bass playing, there's great guitar licks. It's just everybody in the band is firing on all cylinders. I love some of that percussion where it's like you can almost hear the battle, like they're kind of fighting with swords, you know, and you can hear them crashing into each other. It's just such a cool effect. And one of my favorite moments of like bringing the song to life and kind of bringing it into my mind of what's going on in the story. And then it all settles down into this kind of singular Soon moment where it's kind of the aftermath of this massive battle where it's coming to a close, but there's a little bit of a ray of hope there based in the music. And it's maybe my favorite performance by John Anderson. I love his vocals on this. He reaches these heights that are just so amazing. Oh, I love this track so much. It's just so beautiful. And to me, just that track alone makes this an essential Yes album and ranks it so high. But the second side also is great. Sound Chaser is really experimental and fun. It's them in that jazzier sound and style. It's a little bit frenetic and crazy, but it has some nice ear candy and some nice moments and some great singing and vocals and some kind of John Anderson chanting and all of this different stuff. It's wild, but it really captures my imagination in a great way. And To Be Over is kind of the like cool down moment of where they kind of like take it easier. It's like you're floating on a river, kind of relaxing after this crazy assault of all this music and craziness. And I think it really succeeds in that way, that it's just this laid back voyage. Almost sounds like stuff you'd hear from kind of the mellower parts of Tales in moments. But it's not just a ballad. There's lots of interesting stuff going on in this one as well. It kind of has some great moments to close things out, even if in a mellower style. So it's kind of like the jazzier cousin to Close to the Edge, which of course, kind of spoiler alert, we'll get to in just a minute here. But it's structured similarly. It has the big epic on one side and then two kind of minier epics next to it on the second side. So it's structured similarly, and it's a little bit kind of a twisted version, a little bit of Close to the Edge maybe, but I think they work in tandem with each other. They're both the heights of Yes and their powers to me in the best way possible in their progressive styles. So I had to place this second only to my number one album, but it was just such a pleasant listen that I had to put it this high. And I think it's just such a perfect album and really like a great example of the prog genre in general. It's like taking prog to its proggiest moment. This is its conclusion. This was kind of where the prog genre ended its heyday a little bit with this album and surrounding albums in this time. This was kind of the natural conclusion at the early 70s of where prog was headed, and I think it's a majestic, epic way to kind of close out the early period of this genre's history. And so it's a perfect album. It's beautiful. It's everything I want from Yes. It's epic. It's complex. It's crazy. The players are all playing at the top of their abilities. It's beautiful in spots, but it's super rocking in others. And it's a great example of what the genre can do. And of course, we reached the number one, and maybe it's a bit cliche at this point, but the number one album has to be Close to the Edge from 1972. I think this is the peak. This is the pinnacle of the mountain. This is where prog really reached its highest point, close to that edge at the highest level. And I can't deny how perfect of an album it is. It's perfection. If you want to give someone like, okay, if someone says to you like, okay, what is progressive rock? I want to know a perfect definition. What's the one album you could show me that perfectly demonstrates what progressive rock is all about? I think this would be probably the album to show them. This is the one that really personifies to me what progressive rock is all about. And it just kind of like what I said about Relayer, a lot of the same thoughts can apply. Like Close to the Edge, it starts with this kind of crazy frenetic energy to it, but then it slows down a bit and gets into that kind of rockier vibe of that main feel to it. It has such an incredible bass line. That's really what stood out to me when I first heard this, is Chris Squire's bass. And as a young listener, I didn't really ever notice the bass. Like, I thought that was just a background instrument. I didn't even know what it was really. But Chris Squire makes it a main instrument in the band, and it's so cool to hear. And I think Close to the Edge is a great example of how that bass line is such an important part of the song. And there's just such a great groove to it in that first part. It grooves along, it's rocking, it's perfect. And then, of course, there's the section where it all slows down, and it's just these beautiful harmonies between John Anderson, Steve Howe, Chris Squire. They're just perfect melding together. Their voices just somehow are magical together, and they're singing these beautiful lines. And it's like this kind of breath of fresh air, and you're just like taking it all in this majestic way. And then that like organ comes in. It's just like total goosebumps moment where that organ just plays that epic piece, and it just ramps back up towards the conclusion. It's a beautiful piece of music. It's even hard for me to really describe it, but it's so perfect in how it's constructed. Not a second is wasted. I never feel bored listening to it. It's like over 18 minutes long, but every minute is captivating, and it feels like it's over before it even started to me. It's the moment in progressive rock where I kind of solidified my love for the genre. When I heard Close to the Edge, I kind of got progressive music and what it could do, and I realized how special it was. Like, okay, this is why my dad loves this music so much. It's adventurous. It can do so many things. It can rock. It can, slow it down. It could be a ballad, and all in the same song. It could have a jazzier section. All of this stuff can kind of all come together in such a beautiful way. It can be complex and difficult to figure out in sections, but then majestic and sweet and beautiful in others. There's just so much that can be explored, and I really love that nature in the music. It just is so fun that music can do this, that it can go to so many different heights and so many different moments, and I love that epic majesty that just raises up. It gives you goosebumps, and it's just really, just those moments are special to me in music. And then it's kind of like I said with Relayer, it doesn't end there. There's And You and I and Siberian Khatru on the second side, which are both fantastic pieces of music as well. And You and I is a little bit more of a slower ballad type song from the band, but it works really well. It's a beautiful showcase for, guitar and John Anderson's vocals. And once again, it reaches those same majestic heights. It's just beautifully done with great keyboard work, kind of beefing up the sound and really bringing out that majesty and grandeur to this piece. And Siberian Khatru is just a fabulous closer. It kind of rocks more so. It's a really great track that moves through so many different elements, but is so unique sounding, but it's still very Yes in its sound. I just think it's a really well done track that really closes this album out in a perfect way. My dad's never really liked that track very much, and I've always been stunned by that because it's one of Yes's best tracks. It's such a great closer to this album that really makes it a perfect piece of music. It's musical art. It's a perfect package of music. Not a second is wasted. It's perfect from start to finish. I never get bored of it. I listen to it all the time, and every single time I'm just as captivated as I was the first time I heard it. That's what marks a great album to me, is that you can continue to listen to it and always fall in love each time. You could always uncover new cool things in the makes. You can pick out different pieces. You can say, well, this time I'm going to listen more heavily to just the bass part. I'm going to listen now this time to just what he's doing in the background with the keyboards. Whatever, you can kind of focus in on different elements, and it really brings to mind how it all works together in this fantastic way. So just a perfect album, a perfect band. I love their catalog. I've talked way too long. So that's how I feel about the Yes catalog. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's a long one, but hopefully you guys continued on the journey with me. I really love the band, and I know some of those other albums that I ranked lower, have mixed feelings, and some people don't like some of the newer Yes music, but you could always stand by the classics and the classic era of the band and realize how special they truly were. And I'm just such a fan of this music, and it will forever be important to me and have a special place in my heart. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. I really love talking about music, as you can tell. And so I have a lot coming up that I plan to talk about. I have a love for progressive rock that's very deep, and I just wanted to share it with people. That's really my main goal here, is to share great music, to recommend things to people that they may not have heard. And if you have heard all of this stuff like I have, then hopefully you can kind of remember the great feelings you have about it and kind of reminisce with me about these incredible albums that we all love. So thank you guys so much. Hopefully you'll catch me in another video soon. Thank you again. You guys are really great out there. I really appreciate all the comments and everything you guys have done for me. So thank you guys, and I will catch you in another video. Bye.